The snow fell in heavy, silent curtains that Tuesday evening, transforming the familiar urban landscape into something ethereal and hushed, each flake catching the amber glow of streetlights like tiny stars descending from heaven, and Claire Martinez pressed her palm against the cold window of her third-floor apartment, watching the world outside grow increasingly muffled and serene. At 28, she had grown accustomed to these quiet winter nights alone, finding solace in the gentle hum of her space heater and the soft golden light that spilled from her reading lamp across the worn pages of whatever novel currently held her attention, her modest one-bedroom sanctuary decorated with thrift store finds and plants that somehow thrived despite her busy schedule as a mid-level analyst at Meridian Corporation, a job that paid the bills but rarely stirred her soul the way she had hoped her career would when she first graduated college, full of dreams and determination. The knock came at exactly 9:47, she would remember later, 3 soft raps that seemed almost apologetic in their restraint, causing her to glance up from her book with a slight frown because nobody ever visited unannounced, especially not on a night like this when the weather had driven most sensible people indoors hours ago. And when she opened the door after checking the peephole and seeing only shadows, she gasped at the sight before her, a tall man with kind brown eyes and snow-dampened dark hair, probably in his early 30s, crouched beside a tiny girl who couldn't have been more than 3 years old, both of them shivering despite their heavy coats, their faces red from the cold and exhaustion etched in every line of the man's weary expression. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to impose even with his words. "My name is James, and this is my daughter Lily. Our car broke down about 6 blocks away, and I've been walking with her for over an hour trying to find help, but everything's closed, and she's so cold." And as Claire looked down at the little girl whose enormous blue eyes seemed to hold the weight of the world despite her tender age, something deep inside her chest clenched with an emotion she couldn't quite name, a mixture of maternal instinct and pure human compassion that overrode every cautious voice in her head telling her that letting strangers into her home was dangerous and foolish. "Please," James continued, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air, "just for tonight, I can pay you. I just need somewhere warm for her to sleep, and in the morning I'll figure something out. I promise we won't be any trouble." And Claire found herself stepping aside before she had even consciously made the decision, watching as relief flooded the man's features while he gently lifted his daughter and carried her inside, both of them dripping melted snow onto her hardwood floors as she quickly closed the door against the bitter wind that had been whipping through the hallway. The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Claire's nurturing instincts took over completely, heating soup on her small stove while James helped Lily out of her wet clothes and wrapped her in the softest blanket Claire owned, the little girl's quiet "thank you" in a voice like silver bells causing Claire's heart to melt entirely as she watched this exhausted father tend to his child with infinite patience and gentleness, his large hands so careful as he brushed damp curls away from Lily's forehead and whispered reassurances that everything would be all right now. As they sat around her small dining table sharing the simple meal of tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, Claire found herself studying James's profile in the warm lamplight, noting the way his shoulders seemed to carry some invisible burden, the careful way he spoke as if weighing each word, and something about his presence filled her usually quiet apartment with a sense of completeness she hadn't realized she'd been missing, while Lily's sleepy giggles at Claire's gentle teasing created a melody of pure joy that seemed to push back against the storm raging outside. "You don't have to tell me," Claire said softly as she tucked Lily into her own bed, having insisted that her guests take the bedroom while she made do with the couch, "but what brought you out in weather like this with such a little one?" And James's expression grew distant as he explained in quiet tones about a job interview that had run late, about being new to the city and not knowing anyone, about trying so hard to build a better life for his daughter after her mother had passed away 2 years earlier, his voice breaking slightly on those last words in a way that made Claire want to wrap him in the same protective embrace she had given his child. That night, As James lay on her couch despite her protests that he take the more comfortable bed, Claire found herself staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft sounds of his breathing, wondering about the strange twist of fate that had brought these two souls to her doorstep. And when she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with warm brown eyes and the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for far too long. Morning came with surprising swiftness, the storm having passed to leave behind a world transformed by pristine white snow that sparkled like diamonds in the early sunlight, and Claire woke to the smell of coffee and the soft murmur of voices from her kitchen, finding James helping Lily eat cereal at her small table while he sipped from her favorite mug as if he belonged there, as if this domestic scene was the most natural thing in the world. And when he looked up and smiled at her with genuine warmth, she felt something shift permanently in the region of her heart. "I can't thank you enough," he said as they prepared to leave, having called a tow truck that would meet them at his disabled vehicle, and Claire found herself reluctant to let them go, this man and child who had somehow filled her life with light in the span of a single night, though she simply nodded and pressed a container of leftover soup into his hands along with her phone number. "In case you ever need anything," she said, not quite meeting his eyes because the intensity of his gaze made her feel exposed and vulnerable in ways she wasn't prepared to examine. 3 hours later, as Claire sat in the familiar conference room at Meridian Corporation waiting for the monthly all-staff meeting to begin, she was still thinking about the way Lily had hugged her legs goodbye and the look in James's eyes as he had whispered, "Thank you for saving us." So lost in these memories that she barely registered the excited chatter of her colleagues until her supervisor called for attention and announced that they would now meet their new CEO, and when the conference room door opened and James walked in wearing an impeccably tailored suit, his hair now perfectly styled and his whole demeanor radiating the confident authority of a man accustomed to command, Claire's world tilted on its axis as understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and she saw her own shock reflected in his expression, followed immediately by something deeper and more complex, gratitude, admiration, and perhaps the beginning of something that could only be called love. And as he began his presentation about wanting to create a company culture based on compassion and understanding the real struggles of their employees, Claire realized with crystal clarity that the man who had knocked on her door in desperation was not just any stranger, but someone who had chosen to experience vulnerability and need in order to better serve those he would lead, and the kindness she had shown without thought of reward had somehow become the foundation for something beautiful and unexpected and full of infinite possibility. In the days that followed, as James, now revealed as James Morrison, Harvard MBA and heir to a business empire, began implementing policies that prioritized work-life balance and employee well-being, he would often catch Claire's eye during meetings with a look that spoke of shared secrets and profound gratitude, and when he finally asked her to dinner 3 weeks later, explaining with endearing nervousness that he hoped she could see past the deception to the man who had sat at her table and watched his daughter laugh for the first time in months, Claire's answer came without hesitation because she had already seen his true heart that snowy night when he was just a father who needed help, and she knew that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest act of human kindness, a door opened to strangers in the storm, and a heart brave enough to trust in the essential goodness that connects us all.